Queen Anne, the tragic monarch who shaped Britain's future. Secrets of the last Stuart queen. What happens when the crown is passed to a queen whose life is marked by unimaginable personal tragedy, relentless political intrigue, and a best friend turned bitter enemy? How does a monarch navigate a court riddled with secrets, a family embroiled in betrayal, and a nation teetering on the brink of religious and political upheaval? And why does Queen Anne, an oft-overlooked figure in history, hold the keys to understanding some of Britain's most pivotal moments? From the whispered conspiracies of the Glorious Revolution to the fiery fall of Sarah Churchill, we unravel the scandal, strategy, and sorrow that defined the reign of Anne, the last of the Stuarts. Did the woman who lost all 17 of her children to illness and miscarriage find solace in power, or did the crown only deepen her grief? And what role did Anne's precarious health and her court of scheming allies and adversaries play in shaping the Act of Union, the War of the Spanish Succession, and the religious tug-of-war over her successor? If you think monarchs lead charmed lives, prepare to be shocked, intrigued, and thoroughly entertained as we delve into the life of Queen Anne, a tale of endurance, betrayal, and a woman fighting to leave her mark on history. Trust us, you'll never look at royal history the same way again. The mid-17th century was a dangerous time for royalty in England. On a bitter January day in 1649, Anne's grandfather, King Charles I, stood on a scaffold in Whitehall and met the executioner's axe. His death heralded the rise of the Commonwealth under Oliver Cromwell, and the royal family fled into a precarious exile across Europe. James, Duke of York, Anne's father, spent these years wandering through France, Spain, and the Dutch Republic, adapting to life far removed from the grandeur of the English court. But royal exile was no fairy tale. It was a life of constant financial strain, political maneuvering, and the looming threat of assassination. The Stuarts' fortunes reversed in 1660. Cromwell's death and the collapse of the Commonwealth paved the way for the monarchy's restoration. James's elder brother, Charles II, was invited back to England to reclaim the throne, becoming a king of debauchery, charm, and scandal. His numerous mistresses bore him at least a dozen illegitimate children, yet his marriage to Queen Catherine of Braganza produced no heirs. This left James, and consequently his offspring, precariously near the throne. James, now the Duke of York, was a complicated figure, a man of fierce loyalty, but unbending Catholic convictions. During the exile, he had fallen for Anne Hyde, daughter of Edward Hyde, a key royalist ally who later became the Earl of Clarendon. Their romance blossomed in secrecy, but when Anne became visibly pregnant in 1660, James reluctantly agreed to marry her. Scandal rocked the court as whispers swirled about whether a commoner could truly join the royal family. Nevertheless, Anne Hyde proved her mettle. Their first child, Charles, was born in October 1660, but tragically succumbed to smallpox at just 6 months old. This marked the beginning of a grim pattern of infant mortality that would haunt Anne Hyde's children. On February 6, 1665, Anne was born into a world rife with both hope and uncertainty. Her birth occurred during the Great Plague of London, a fitting metaphor for the turbulence surrounding the Stuarts. From the outset, Anne's life was marked by fragility. She suffered from a condition known as defluxion, which caused excessive tears to flow from her eyes. In a bid to find a cure, her parents sent her to France, where she lived under the care of her grandmother, Queen Henrietta Maria, and her aunt, Henrietta Anne. The French court, dazzling yet dangerous, introduced young Anne to European culture and intrigue. Anne's idyllic time in France ended abruptly in 1670 when her aunt died suddenly, likely from a ruptured ulcer. Heartbroken, Anne returned to England, where she joined her elder sister Mary in Richmond under the watchful eye of Bishop Henry Compton. Here, the two princesses were raised as Protestants, a decision orchestrated by their uncle Charles II to stabilize a nation wary of Catholic influence. Anne's future seemed destined to be unremarkable. With an elder brother and sister ahead of her, as well as her parents still of childbearing age, Anne appeared a distant figure in the line of succession. However, tragedy began to shape her path. Anne's younger brothers, Charles, born in 1666, and Edgar, born in 1667, both succumbed to illnesses in early childhood. Her mother, Anne Hyde, died of cancer in 1671, leaving Anne and Mary as their father's only surviving children. As Charles II's marriage to Catherine of Braganza remained childless, James's daughters were suddenly thrust into the spotlight as potential heirs. The tension heightened when James's Catholicism became a public issue. His conversion to Roman Catholicism had occurred during his exile, but was revealed more openly after his marriage to Marievna, an Italian Catholic princess. England, fiercely Protestant since the Reformation, viewed this development with alarm. Fears of a Catholic dynasty grew, especially after the birth of James's son, James Francis Edward Stuart, in 1688, a child derisively nicknamed the Pretender. Enter Mary of Modena, Italian, devoutly Catholic, and young enough to be Anne's older sister. Anne and her new stepmother did not get along. Anne reportedly referred to her as that Italian woman, and their relationship was as frosty as a Windsor winter. Anne's solace was her sister, Mary, who shared her Protestant faith and became her emotional anchor. But even this bond was tested in 1677 when Mary was married off to William of Orange, a Dutch stadtholder and a man of stern Calvinist principles. Mary packed her bags for the Netherlands, leaving Anne feeling abandoned. Who was left to fill the void? Enter Sarah Jennings, a whip-smart courtier 5 years Anne's senior, who became her confidant, best friend, and later a source of monumental political drama. Sarah Jennings was no ordinary friend. Coming from a respectable but not dazzling family, she married John Churchill, a military genius destined to become the Duke of Marlborough. Anne and Sarah's relationship, deeply personal but often speculated about, shaped Anne's personal and political life. Anne was devoted to Sarah, but their friendship would later spiral into a tumultuous roller coaster of affection, power struggles, and heartbreak. For now, though, Sarah was Anne's rock. The 1670s and 1680s were turbulent years for Anne's family. James's Catholicism became the focus of national hysteria, fueled by fabricated rumors of a popish plot to assassinate Charles II and install James on the throne. Parliament even attempted to exclude James from the line of succession, though this effort ultimately failed. To escape the political storm, James and his family spent time in the Low Countries and Scotland, dragging Anne along for the ride. Imagine being a teenager on a forced family vacation. Only instead of beachside relaxation, it's political exile amidst anti-Catholic fervor. In 1683, Anne married George, Prince of Denmark and Norway, a man described as amiable but dull, essentially the royal version of comfort food. Their union was more about geopolitics than passion. England, over-reliant on its alliance with the Dutch through Mary and William's marriage, sought to diversify its foreign policy options by aligning with Denmark. Anne, just 18, entered this marriage with hope, but it quickly became a saga of relentless tragedy. Within months, Anne became pregnant, but the child was stillborn. This was only the beginning of a harrowing pattern. Over the years, Anne would endure a dozen stillbirths and miscarriages, with only one child surviving past infancy. The emotional toll was devastating, compounded by the political whirlwind swirling around her family. In 1685, Charles II died. Despite his numerous illegitimate children, he left no legitimate heir, because he refused to divorce his wife, Catherine of Braganza, who bore him no children. James II ascended the throne as England's first Catholic monarch in over a century. His reign, however, was doomed by his heavy-handed religious policies. James promoted Catholics to high offices, alienating the Protestant majority, and his plans to overhaul land ownership in Ireland further stoked fears of a Catholic counter-revolution. Anne's personal tragedies reached a crescendo in 1687. That year, she lost 3 children in the span of 9 months. 2 daughters, Anne and Mary, fell victim to a smallpox outbreak, and she suffered a stillbirth in October. The emotional devastation for Anne and George was profound, a grief compounded by the sense of what might have been. The final blow to James's reign came in 1688 when his second wife, Mary of Modena, gave birth to a son. This dashed Protestant hopes that James would die without a Catholic heir, leaving the throne to Mary or Anne. Panic set in. A group of English nobles secretly invited William of Orange to invade England and claim the throne alongside his wife Mary. William landed in November 1688, and James, abandoned by much of his army and court, fled to France, a departure as undignified as it was final. As William of Orange landed in England with an army in 1688, Anne was faced with a choice: loyalty to her father or to her Protestant faith and political pragmatism. With advice from her closest confidant, Sarah Churchill, Anne chose the latter. She fled Whitehall under the cover of darkness, famously exclaiming, "I will not remain where I am bound to lose my soul for my father's sake." While James II fled to France, Anne returned to London, coolly indifferent to her father's exile. She greeted her brother-in-law, William, warmly, partly out of family loyalty and partly due to her new position as the heir presumptive to the throne. Anne's political calculations were astute. Her sister Mary and William were childless, making Anne the natural successor. William and Mary were crowned co-monarchs on April 11, 1689, at Westminster Abbey. Their reign ushered in a constitutional monarchy and cemented Protestant rule. Anne, pregnant with her first surviving child, played her cards wisely, naming her son William after the new king. Prince William would tragically become one of Anne's few children to live beyond infancy, though his life was brief by modern standards. Relations between Anne and William were fraught. Anne resented his frugality, especially when he denied her request for the use of Richmond Palace, citing war expenditures. This frostiness turned to outright hostility when John Churchill, Sarah's husband, was accused of Jacobite sympathies and stripped of his titles. William and Mary pressured Anne to dismiss Sarah, but Anne steadfastly refused, deepening the familial rift. The 9 Years' War, 1688 to 1697, known also as the War of the League of Augsburg, embroiled Europe in conflict. James II, backed by France's son king, Louis XIV, sought to reclaim his throne by leveraging Catholic support in Ireland. William, not one to shy from battle, crushed James's forces in Ireland in 1690 at the Battle of the Boyne and again at Aughrim in 1691. James fled back to France, earning the derisive nickname James the Loser among William's supporters. The war's aftermath left a bitter legacy in Ireland. Protestant landowners consolidated power, laying the groundwork for centuries of sectarian strife, issues Anne would grapple with as queen. Anne's life was plagued by relentless personal sorrow. Between 1684 and 1700, she endured 12 miscarriages, stillbirths, and infant deaths. Her sole surviving child, Prince William, died at just 11 years old in 1700 from what modern doctors suspect was bacterial pharyngitis. His death devastated Anne, leaving her without an heir and emotionally shattered. In 1694, Queen Mary succumbed to smallpox. Despite their recent estrangement, Anne offered to attend her sister's sickbed, but Mary declined, perhaps out of fear of contagion or lingering resentment. Anne never saw Mary again, and her grief was profound. With William III now ruling alone, Anne was just one step away from the throne. The death of Prince William and the looming succession crisis prompted Parliament to pass the Act of Settlement in 1701. This law barred Catholics from inheriting the throne, ensuring Protestant continuity. It also secured Anne's place as William's successor, provided he produced no heirs through a remarriage. As William's reign wound down, Europe teetered on the edge of another conflict. The death of Spain's Charles II, who left his empire to Louis XIV's grandson, Philip of Anjou, sparked the War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714. This war would define Anne's reign, pitting England and its allies against France and Spain in a struggle for European dominance. When Queen Anne ascended the throne in 1702, England had already transitioned into a constitutional monarchy where the sovereign's power was significantly checked by Parliament. Anne, a pragmatic and understated monarch, found herself navigating a nation teetering on the brink of change, socially, politically, and militarily. Unlike some of her successors, notably the headstrong King George III, Anne was content to let Parliament steer the ship of state. This deference wasn't out of weakness, but a recognition of the reality established by the English Civil Wars and the Glorious Revolution. These events had firmly placed the balance of power in Parliament's hands, with laws like the Bill of Rights ensuring no monarch could unilaterally dictate policy. While Anne preferred a hands-off approach, her early decisions, such as appointing her husband, Prince George of Denmark, as Lord High Admiral and promoting John Churchill, later Duke of Marlborough, as Captain General, were pivotal. Marlborough, a towering figure in England's military history, soon proved his worth in the War of the Spanish Succession. The War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714, was sparked by the death of Charles II of Spain, who left his vast empire to Philip of Anjou, the grandson of France's Louis XIV. This succession threatened the balance of power in Europe as a Franco-Spanish alliance loomed. England, Austria, and the Dutch Republic formed the Grand Alliance to counter this threat. Marlborough became the star general of this coalition, leading a series of campaigns that would define Anne's reign. One of his most famous victories came at the Battle of Blenheim in 1704. In southern Germany, Marlborough's forces faced a Franco-Bavarian army intent on pushing toward Vienna. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Vienna's fall would likely collapse the Grand Alliance. With precision and daring, Marlborough orchestrated a resounding victory, capturing or killing half of the enemy's 55,000 troops. This triumph not only saved Vienna, but cemented Marlborough's reputation as a military genius. Back in England, he and his formidable wife, Sarah Churchill, began construction of the Grand Blenheim Palace, financed in part by Queen Anne herself, a testament to his enduring legacy. The war wasn't confined to European battlefields. England's emerging naval dominance played a critical role. In 1704, just weeks before Blenheim, Anglo-Dutch forces captured Gibraltar, a strategic rock that remains under British control to this day. By 1708, Minorca in the Balearic Islands also fell into English hands. These naval successes highlighted England's growing maritime supremacy, setting the stage for its eventual global empire. Amid the war, nature unleashed its fury in the form of the Great Storm of 1703. This hurricane-like tempest devastated southern England, uprooting thousands of trees, toppling chimneys across London, and sinking hundreds of ships in the Channel. Fatalities soared toward 10,000, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in British history. At the height of the storm, Anne and her household took shelter in the cellar of St. James's Palace, avoiding the falling masonry. Afterward, she described it as a calamity so dreadful and astonishing that the like hath not been seen or felt in the memory of any persons. Religious dissenters capitalized on the disaster, claiming it was divine retribution against the proposed Occasional Conformity Bill, a controversial measure to curb the influence of Protestant dissenters in government. Anne's reign also witnessed the political unification of England and Scotland into Great Britain. This union wasn't a smooth affair. Scotland, reeling from economic crises like the Seven Third Years' Famine and the disastrous Darien Scheme and ill-fated colonial venture in Panama, sought relief. However, the Scottish Parliament's 1704 Act of Security, declaring Scotland's right to choose its own monarch after Anne's death, alarmed England. In response, the English Parliament passed the Alien Act in 1705, effectively threatening economic sanctions against Scotland. Anne supported these measures and championed the creation of a commission to draft an Act of Union. The agreement dissolved the Scottish Parliament, creating a unified British state in 1707. This union brought mutual benefits. Scotland gained access to English markets, while England secured a politically stable northern neighbor. Despite her focus on statecraft, Anne was a patron of the arts and sciences. She commissioned works from prominent artists like Godfrey Kneller, whose portraits of luminaries like Isaac Newton and John Locke remain iconic, and Michael Dahl, who painted both Anne and her husband. Her love of nature inspired her to commission Jacob Bogdani to create pastoral paintings featuring exotic birds and animals. Architecturally, she oversaw innovations like the orangery at Kensington Palace, designed by Nicholas Hawksmoor, with its early form of central heating and plant conservatory. Anne's reign was a bridge between the absolutism of earlier monarchs and the parliamentary dominance of later ones. While she left much of governance to Parliament, her strategic appointments and support for landmark achievements like the Act of Union and the victories of the War of the Spanish Succession shaped Britain's trajectory. She may not have wielded power with an iron fist, but her reign laid the groundwork for Britain's emergence as a global power. let us return to the regal chaos of Queen Anne's court, a world teetering on the brink of triumph and treachery. Queen Anne, once bosom friends with Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough, now found herself estranged from her former confidant. The rift, more volcanic than political, simmered as Sarah's domineering personality clashed with Anne's increasing desire for independence. Anne, now favoring the soft-spoken Abigail Masham, replaced Sarah's razor-sharp candor with soothing whispers, leaving the once unbreakable bond shattered beyond repair. This personal feud bled into national affairs with alarming consequences. While the War of the Spanish Succession raged across Europe, the Queen's personal squabbles seeped into the strategy rooms. Sarah's husband, the indomitable Duke of Marlborough, had led the Allied forces to decisive victories at Blenheim and Oudenarde, dealing stinging blows to Louis XIV's ambitions. Yet, as England's purse strings groaned under the war's strain, whispers of clandestine peace talks fluttered through the corridors of power. Tory ministers, aligned with Anne's new circle, secretly reached out to the French to end the war, much to Marlborough's outrage. After all, nothing screams loyalty like inviting the enemy over for tea while your troops march through muddy fields. Marlborough, never one to do things halfway, proposed a daring invasion of France itself, a march on Paris to deal the decisive blow. But wars, as any bureaucrat will tell you, are expensive business. Marlborough's grand vision alarmed Anne's ministers, who decided to play a game of political chess with the war hero. Accusations of embezzlement rained down upon him. Ludicrous charges, perhaps, but they had their desired effect. Anne dismissed Marlborough in December 1711, a blow as shocking to the French as it was to the Allies. Marlborough and Sarah fled into voluntary exile, touring the courts of Central Europe as celebrities of sorts, while back home the Treaty of Utrecht was hammered out, effectively ending the War of the Spanish Succession. The treaty was a diplomatic patchwork quilt. Philip of Anjou was recognized as King of Spain, but with a catch. The thrones of France and Spain could never unite under one crown. Britain, ever the shrewd negotiator, gained Gibraltar and Minorca, alongside lucrative Atlantic trade concessions that, unfortunately, bolstered the transatlantic slave trade. The grand finale of Anne's government was bittersweet, a victory tinged with missed opportunities. By the time the ink dried on the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, Anne's health was deteriorating rapidly. Once capable of hobbling through court with a walking stick, she now found herself confined to her throne, or more often her sickbed. Gout, dropsy, and an array of fevers rendered her increasingly isolated. Meetings with her ministers grew rarer and more contentious, particularly with Robert Harley, the Earl of Oxford, whose drunken escapades added farce to the Queen's tragic twilight years. The end came swiftly. On July 30th, 1714, Anne suffered a debilitating stroke on the anniversary of her son William's death. A cruel reminder of her 17 children, all lost to illness or tragedy. She passed away the next morning at just 49 years of age. Her swollen, gout-ridden body required an outsized, square-shaped coffin. In death, as in life, Anne defied convention. Anne's death threw the kingdom into disarray. The Protestant succession was secure in theory, but in practice? A mess. Her designated heir, Sophia of Hanover, had inconveniently died weeks earlier, leaving her son, George, Elector of Hanover, to take the crown. He spoke no English and arrived to a less than enthusiastic reception. Riots broke out in dozens of towns, but the die was cast. The House of Stuart bowed out, and the House of Hanover began its reign, setting the stage for a new era. Queen Anne's reign saw profound change. The Act of Union forged Britain as a unified state, the War of the Spanish Succession altered the European balance of power, and the two-party system began to take root. Yet Anne's life was a portrait of loss. She endured the deaths of her parents, siblings, and all 17 of her children. Her reign may have been marked by great victories and innovations, but it was overshadowed by personal sorrow. Intrigued by these tales of triumph and turmoil? Subscribe to our channel for more captivating narratives and behind-the-scenes looks at history's most pivotal moments. Don't miss our next episode as we dive into the rise of the Hanoverian dynasty and the dawn of a new era.